obviously we met first in 2016 in the Cheltenham Composers Academy, and that's when you wrote Crow as well,
Hmm.
which I remember actually keeping the score of that because I just loved the sounds of the piano.
Oh, that's nice.
You created it. It was such the first movement is so striking, because it's a very very bold opening, and then it suddenly goes to this very very quiet strumming, and it was incredible, and it still stays with me. I mean, I've remembered it for years. So I was wondering, like, has your musical style changed since then? Obviously, it's a piece that's now 4 years old, and sort of how have you developed since then?
Yeah, it definitely has changed a lot since then. As I think it should, because you don't want to be doing the same thing all the time. But
Mm.
for me, it definitely, I changed everything after. Basically, I had some very, rather hairy mental health issues a few years ago, and then after that, I just kind of decided that I was fed up with writing this very kind of strict, because Crow is very strict and
Mm.
systematic. Everything is number systems and yada yada. And then I decided that I was going to do a bit of a 180 and just kind of put myself on stage. So nowadays, I'm basically performing in every piece I write, even if it's just like I'm doing like sometimes I won't be performing directly on stage, but I'll improvise on an electronic instrument and use that in the piece, or I'll make a video part in which I'm featured or whatever. But at the same time, still using all the number systems. So kind of very kind of wacky material with very strict, rigid structures is the kind of direction I'm doing at the moment. And Crow is an interesting point in this kind of development, because what I liked, or what struck me about the performance of it, is you mentioned the contrast between the opening chords and then the strumming. What struck me about this was that this became part of the experience of the piece for me, the pianist moving between the things. Unfortunately, it's something we don't get on the CD, but
No.
so it's okay. But when the musicians move around,
Mm.
I I love that. So now a lot of my pieces nowadays involve moving around the space,
Yeah.
moving around the stage, or using the whole console. Yeah.
Well, I think movement is so integral to music.
Mm.
I know for me, I when I write for orchestras and things, I think of exactly how people are moving, and so I'll sort of say you've got to do this as a fast gesture or sort of slow, because especially when we're listening to music in a concert hall environment, it's very much a visual experience as well.
I think it's mostly a visual experience. No,
Mm.
that's too much. But
But
it's definitely part
it
of
is
the
very
thing.
different, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. So I suppose given the current situation, the fact that there's not really like a proper album launch or it's online because of the coronavirus, what's life like in Denmark at the moment?
You mean in terms of coronavirus?
Mm.
um,
Yeah, affected your working life.
yeah, concerts have been closed. There's no big concerts at the moment. But in terms of my working life, it hasn't affected me so much because as we said earlier, like the commissions still stand whether or
Mm.
not the concert happens. And the situation in Denmark, a lot of the funding is coming from the Arts Council, and there you submit the piece, and it doesn't have to be before the concert happens. It doesn't have to be after the concert happens. You have to have a concert date, of course, but you can just submit that. So it's kind of business as usual in a way, except I'm obviously feeling the social pressure to like stay inside more and not go to my little office that I rent. And also the mental health side of things, where it's tempting to just isolate and stay inside.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing about concerts being cancelled is quite a big thing, because, and actually
Mm.
this is a consequence of changing my musical style, is that now I'm much more focused on just like the situation of the concert and like taking that as part of the piece, and not necessarily thinking like this is a piece that can be played anywhere, but doing more site specific things and stuff that works in this exact concert hall I've envisioned, with this audience, with this people playing. Like, so a lot of this have been like the rug's been pulled out from under me a little bit, so I'm having to think about things in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's hard because I mean, whether concerts are cancelled or most of them in the UK are being like postponed indefinitely at the moment. But it does mean that some of them might be in a different space than they originally were. or they might be performed by a different ensemble before the original ensemble plays them. And so it's more of an unknown in terms of the musical process between the page and the musicians, I guess, as well.
Yeah. That's what I find is exciting sometimes, though.
Yeah.
A little bit of unknown is a little spicy.
We've got lots of unknown at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so more widely, obviously, as you're in Denmark, how are composers supported over there in relation to the UK, where we constantly seem to have to apply for grants or sort of smaller projects? Is there a different sort of support system in place in Denmark?
No, it's still very much the case of applying for a lot of grants. I can't speak to the UK because I've never really dealt with the funding application process there. Here it's, it's a pain in the ass as usual when you need to apply with like an unfinished project. You need to apply with an unfinished project, but then you have to say why it's good. Well, you have to say why the finished project is going to be good. So it's a little backwards, but I think there's much worse ways to run it. And I think in general, the arts funding here is very good. And there's a lot of more opportunities to apply for not only specific projects, but for just working grants, where you don't have to have you don't have to even have to have any kind of contract with the musicians. You can just say, I would like to write this piece. I'm applying for this much money. And of course, maybe you don't get it, but like it's at least the option is there. And also just generally, there's less people in Denmark. Like there's 5 million people in the whole country, which means that the funding application process is just more streamlined. Like just because there's less of it for the people to sift through.
Okay, so I think my last question was, obviously it's 4 years on from Cheltenham Composer Academy and first hearing Crow. How was it hearing the recording?
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the piece has actually been played since. So I think actually exactly 2 years after Cheltenham. so I haven't really like left it in a way. Yeah, it was really nice. And it's a completely different, like I said, with the CD recording, instead of having a live performance, we're missing the thing with going between the thing and the thing, but it adds something else. And I think it makes a nicer a flow to Crow, if you will. Like it makes it breathe a bit more, but you don't have to constant shuffling around. You can hear the little techniques more.
Yeah,
it's a very different experience. I'm sure you've had the same thing. It's a very different experience to seeing it live, but I think it's my first like proper commercial like CD recording release. So like as in like not a recording of a live performance.
Yeah.
Like something made for studio is a very different approach, and it sounds very different, and it's been really interesting.
Yeah, that's it. I think so many of the small sounds are amplified, which is great because often in a large concert hall those get missed, or they're not as clear as they should be. And it's really nice to have that sort of very much sort of a bit more sort of inside and just hearing it all very much. Yeah. Good.
Cool.